Imagine for just a moment that the clock has turned back nearly 3/4 of a century. The year is somewhere in the early 1950s. The world has emerged from the shadows of war, and though scars remain, hope runs through every small town street, every farmhouse, and every schoolroom. The camera of memory pans slowly over a sleepy American town. Whitewashed houses with front porches, freshly painted picket fences, and gardens bursting with roses and tulips in spring bloom. A Chevrolet Bel Air rumbles down Main Street, its chrome catching the morning sun. A milk truck rattles along the curb, stopping at each house to leave glass bottles clinking with fresh cream. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the hour. And just there, at the center of this community, stands a brick schoolhouse, sturdy, practical, a symbol of both tradition and promise. Inside, behind tall windows that let in shafts of golden morning light, rows of wooden desks wait patiently for children to arrive. At the front of the room rests a chalkboard, smudged faintly white from yesterday's lessons, and beside it, a neat oak desk where a teacher's papers, textbooks, and the faint scent of chalk dust linger. This is where our story begins, a day in the life of a 1950s teacher. To understand this day, we must first understand the time. The 1950s were years of transition, not just for America, but for communities across the world. The war years had been harsh, filled with rationing, separation, and uncertainty. Now, in this decade, people sought stability. Families grew, suburbs spread, radios played big band music in the evenings, while television sets, still new and magical, flickered in living rooms with black and white images of news anchors, sitcom families, and variety shows. For a teacher, the 1950s meant being more than an instructor of arithmetic and grammar. They were guides, moral anchors, and often surrogate parents during the school day. Teachers were looked up to, respected by parents and children alike. Their role carried both responsibility and honor. Imagine the life of one such teacher. Perhaps her name is Miss Parker, though every town had their own version of her. She's in her mid-30s, dedicated, composed, with a wardrobe of simple cotton dresses and sensible shoes, polished each morning. She wakes before dawn, ties her hair neatly, and carries herself with a quiet dignity. For her, teaching is not merely a job, it is a calling. Step into her classroom, and you will notice details that today feel like relics, but once were part of everyday life. Wooden desks, carved with initials of past students, each with an inkwell now rarely used, but still polished for neatness. Maps of the United States and the wider world hang on the walls, their edges curled slightly from age. A large portrait of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln keeps watch above the blackboard, a reminder of duty and patriotism. The air smells faintly of chalk dust, pencil shavings, and floor polish. Sunlight streams through tall windows, and on chilly mornings the radiators hiss and clang, warming the room with their steady hum. Out in the hallway, a bulletin board displays carefully pinned student drawings, reports, and announcements of upcoming school plays or Friday assemblies. And at the heart of it all, Miss Parker's desk, a solid oak table stacked with attendance books, hand-graded papers, and the bell she uses to call her students to attention. Each object tells a story, each detail carrying the weight of an era. Outside the classroom, the 1950s carried a rhythm that shaped the way teachers lived their days. Towns were close-knit. Neighbors knew one another by name, and teachers were often recognized not just as educators, but as figures of community trust. They attended Sunday services, led reading groups at the library, and were frequent faces at local baseball games or school dances. There was a sense of order, of structure. Yet beneath the calm surface, the world was shifting. The Cold War brewing quietly in the background, new technologies reshaping daily life, and young people beginning to dream beyond the boundaries of tradition. For teachers, this meant balancing timeless lessons, handwriting drills, multiplication tables, history recitations, with the growing awareness that the world their students would inherit might look very different from the one they knew. And still, every morning began with the same ritual, the sound of sneakers and leather shoes scuffing the hallway floor, the hum of voices growing louder as students filled the classroom, the scrape of chairs being pulled across the wooden floorboards, the teacher standing tall at the front, greeting each child with a smile, ready to guide them through another day. As you listen to this story, perhaps you remember your own school days, the desks lined in perfect rows, the chalk squeaking across the board, the gentle but firm voice of a teacher reminding you to sit up straight, to mind your handwriting, to remember your lessons. Maybe you recall the smell of packed lunches waiting in the hallway, or the sound of the recess bell releasing a flood of laughter onto the playground. For some of you, this might not just be memory, it might be lived experience. The 1950s were a lifetime ago, yet they are close enough that the details still glow warmly in recollection. The teacher's patience, the pride in a well-written essay, the comfort of routine, all of it lives on in the quiet corners of memory. This video is not simply about describing what a teacher's day looked like. It is about rekindling the feeling of being there. In that classroom, in that time, surrounded by the texture of a world that was simpler, yet no less profound. Every story worth telling begins with a reason, a heartbeat that makes it more than just words, more than just a history lesson. Why, after all, should we step back into the life of a 1950s teacher? What makes this journey not only interesting, but deeply meaningful? The answer lies in the quiet power of ordinary days. Teachers in the 1950s lived lives that, on the surface, might seem unremarkable, waking early, tending to lessons, standing before a class of children with chalk in hand. And yet, those days built the foundation for generations. Those classrooms filled with wooden desks and handwritten notes shaped the lives of men and women who would go on to build the world we know today. By exploring the rhythm of just one day, we glimpse something larger, the spirit of an era. We see the values that were passed down, the struggles hidden between the lines, and the triumphs of community that gave meaning to every small act of teaching. And perhaps most importantly, we are reminded that the simple, steady lives of teachers mattered. They mattered to every child who walked through those doors, to every family who entrusted their sons and daughters to the school, and to every community that measured its strength not in wealth or buildings, but in the character of its children. For many watching now, this story is not some distant chapter of history, but a doorway into memory. You may recall your own teachers, their voices echoing across the decades, the faint squeak of chalk scratching across the board, the snap of a wooden ruler against a desk to restore order, the warm encouragement of a smile when you solved a difficult math problem. For some, these memories may come alive with startling clarity. The cool metal of the drinking fountain in the hallway, the crisp paper of composition notebooks, ruled with blue lines and filled with carefully practiced cursive handwriting, the smell of lunch drifting from the cafeteria, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, applesauce, and sometimes, if you were lucky, chocolate pudding. For others, the memories might come secondhand, passed down from parents or grandparents who described what their classrooms looked like, what their teachers expected, and how much respect they commanded. These stories, told around dinner tables or during quiet evenings, remind us that the world of the 1950s is not just a set of black and white photographs. It was alive with color, texture, sound, and emotion. Nostalgia has a way of softening the edges of time. It allows us to see the beauty in moments that once seemed ordinary. And by revisiting a teacher's life in the 1950s, we do more than reconstruct history. We awaken the emotional fabric that connects us to that time. In the 1950s, teaching was not simply employment. It was a role of profound respect and responsibility. Teachers were pillars of the community, often seen as moral guides as much as academic instructors. When a teacher walked down Main Street, people noticed. They greeted them politely with the understanding that this was someone entrusted with the minds and hearts of the town's children. Parents placed immense trust in teachers, knowing that their children would spend hours each day under their care. And children, though sometimes mischievous, understood the authority of the classroom. A teacher's approval could feel like winning a medal. A teacher's disapproval could sting more than any scolding from home. The importance of teachers in that era also reflected the values of the time. Post-war America longed for stability, structure, and a sense of continuity. Teachers embodied those ideals. They preserved traditions, from morning recitations of the Pledge of Allegiance to lessons in cursive writing and mental arithmetic. They also prepared children for the future, instilling discipline, curiosity, and resilience in a world that was rapidly changing. To look at the life of a 1950s teacher is to see the delicate balance between tradition and progress, between authority and care. It is to understand how much influence one individual could hold in shaping the lives of many. Part of what makes this story compelling is how different it feels from the classrooms of today. In the 1950s, classrooms were smaller, often with just one teacher managing a room full of students across multiple grade levels. Technology was minimal. No tablets, no projectors, no smartboards. Lessons came from textbooks, chalkboards, and the teacher's own knowledge. Students wrote with pencils or fountain pens. Homework was often hand-copied from the board, requiring neatness and patience. Discipline was strict. Talking out of turn, forgetting homework, or showing disrespect could lead to stern consequences. But with that discipline came structure, and with structure came a sense of order that parents often appreciated. At the same time, schools were deeply tied to community life. Teachers attended the same churches, shopped at the same stores, and lived in the same neighborhoods as their students. The bond between teacher and community was direct, unfiltered, and strong. For modern viewers, looking back at this world offers both fascination and reflection. It reminds us how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. The tools are different. The expectations may have shifted, but the heart of teaching, the desire to guide, to nurture, to inspire, remains timeless. This is why we invite you to stay with us as we walk through the day. Because in retracing each step, from the morning routine to the final reflection at night, we do more than observe, we experience. We will see the teacher rise early, preparing for the day with a mix of duty and quiet pride. We will step into the classroom as children shuffle in, books under arms, laughter and chatter filling the halls. We will sit through lessons, feeling the rhythm of handwriting drills, geography quizzes, and history recitations. We will step outside into the playground, hear the ringing of the recess bell, and watch as the teacher balances discipline with compassion. We will gather at the family dinner table, sharing meals rich in tradition and flavor, before winding down in the soft glow of an evening lamp. Every part of the day tells its own story. Every moment is a window into the heart of the 1950s. And by the time we reach the end, we will not only understand the life of a teacher, we will feel it as though we too had lived that day. So why should you keep watching? Because this is more than nostalgia. It is a chance to reconnect with something essential. The beauty of a life built on routine, purpose, and quiet dedication. The story of a 1950s teacher is, in many ways, the story of countless men and women who gave their days to the service of others. It is a reminder of the dignity found in ordinary life, the richness of community, and the way small acts of care ripple outward across generations. Perhaps you are here to remember. perhaps you are here to discover. Either way, you will find that within this single day lies a wealth of insight, emotion, and history. Stay with us, and together we will walk step by step into the past, into the schoolhouse, into the community, into the heart of a time when teaching was both ordinary and extraordinary. This is not just a story, it is a journey, and it is waiting for you. The day begins long before the first child sets foot in the schoolyard. For our teacher, let us continue to imagine her as Miss Parker, the alarm clock rings at the break of dawn. It is not a digital tone, but the sharp metallic rattle of a wind-up clock set on the nightstand beside her bed. The room is still dim, the first blush of daylight filtering through lace curtains. Outside, the world is stirring slowly. The sound of a rooster crowing from a nearby farm, the distant hum of a delivery truck making its rounds. She stretches, takes a deep breath, and for a moment listens to the quiet of the morning. In the 1950s, mornings held a certain stillness. There were no smartphones buzzing with notifications, no television blasting headlines. The world entered gently. A teacher's day began with silence, reflection, and the small routines that brought order to life. Miss Parker slips into her robe, ties it neatly at the waist, and pads softly across the wooden floorboards. The house is modest, rented perhaps on the edge of town, with just enough space for comfort, but not excess. She fills a kettle at the sink, sets it on the stove, and strikes a match to light the gas flame. The hiss and whoosh of the burner come alive, and soon the kettle begins its low, familiar hum. As she prepares for the day, her thoughts already wander toward the classroom. Did she grade every arithmetic test last night? Will Johnny finally remember his spelling words? How will she keep Clara, the daydreamer, focused during history? These thoughts, small but significant, are the heartbeat of her mornings. Breakfast in the 1950s was not rushed, even for someone with a busy day ahead. On the kitchen table sits a check tablecloth, slightly faded but carefully kept. She prepares a simple meal: scrambled eggs, toast with butter, perhaps a slice of ham or bacon if it was purchased fresh the day before. Beside her plate sits a glass of orange juice, fresh squeezed if she had time, poured from a glass bottle if not. The radio hums softly in the background. Stations in the 1950s filled mornings with cheerful announcers, light music, and occasional news updates. A familiar voice might read the headlines: discussions of President Eisenhower, stories of suburban growth, local announcements about church picnics or high school football games. For Miss Parker, the radio is both companion and window to the wider world. She listens as she eats, sometimes jotting notes on a scrap of paper for her lesson plan, sometimes simply sipping coffee and letting the warmth prepare her for the hours ahead. This quiet half-hour of breakfast is more than nourishment. It is a grounding ritual, a moment to gather herself before facing the eager eyes and endless questions of the classroom. When breakfast is done and her satchel packed, filled with graded papers, chalk, textbooks, and perhaps a thermos of coffee, Miss Parker steps outside. The air is cool and fresh, tinged with the scent of cut grass or the smoke of a neighbor's chimney. If she lives close to the school, she walks, her sensible shoes tapping against the sidewalk as she greets the world waking up around her. Children pass by, some carrying lunch pails, others skipping stones or tugging at their siblings' hands. Neighbors wave from porches, tipping their hats in polite greeting. If she drives, it is in a modest car of the time, perhaps a Ford or Chevrolet, humming down quiet streets lined with elm trees. Gasoline is inexpensive, traffic minimal. She parks beside the schoolhouse where the gravel crunches under her tires. The journey to school is not just physical, it is emotional. With every step or mile, she shifts from the private world of home into the public role of teacher, a transition she has made countless times, yet one that always carries a sense of purpose. The school itself is already alive with subtle signs of activity. The janitor has unlocked the doors, the smell of oiled floors mingling with chalk dust. In the distance, she hears the clatter of another teacher arranging desks, the soft hum of a vacuum in the hallway. Miss Parker enters her classroom, setting down her satchel with care. She opens the windows to let in the morning air, straightens the rows of desks, and writes the date neatly in chalk on the blackboard. Each detail is intentional. The crispness of the board, the order of the room, the sense of readiness that greets her students the moment they arrive. She arranges flashcards for spelling, stacks of arithmetic worksheets, and a globe for the geography lesson. At her desk, she places a fresh vase of flowers, perhaps daisies or wildflowers, brought from her own garden or gifted by a thoughtful student's family. The classroom is not just a space, it is a stage, and she is preparing it for the performance of the day. Outside, the schoolyard grows lively. Children chatter, play tag, and toss balls back and forth. The sound builds like a rising orchestra until the first bell rings, a crisp clang that cuts through the air and signals the start of order. Students shuffle in, cheeks flushed from play, lunch boxes swinging. They take their seats with varying degrees of discipline, some sitting straight and eager, others whispering until Miss Parker clears her throat with gentle authority. The energy of the room shifts from playful chaos to attentive focus. The day has begun. The morning begins with ritual. First, the Pledge of Allegiance, recited in unison as small hands press against chests and voices fill the room. Then, roll call, each child answering present as Miss Parker checks names with her fountain pen. She greets them warmly, sometimes sharing a short anecdote or moral reminder to set the tone of the day. Then the first subject begins, perhaps arithmetic with problems written neatly across the board, or grammar with students copying sentences into notebooks. The rhythm is steady, familiar. Children scratch pencils across paper, erasers smudge mistakes, and the chalk squeaks softly as Miss Parker explains. The morning sun filters through tall windows, casting patterns on the floor. It is ordinary, yet in its ordinariness lies a beauty that time has polished into memory. Looking back, mornings like these may seem small, but to those who lived them, they were the foundation of learning, discipline, and growth. Every bell, every roll call, every lesson in long division or cursive writing carried significance. They taught children not only facts but habits, punctuality, respect, perseverance. They taught them to listen, to focus, to take pride in their work. For the teacher, these mornings were a blend of routine and purpose. They were demanding, yes, but also deeply fulfilling. To see a child's eyes light up with understanding, to watch shy students grow into confident speakers, to know that even in the smallest ways, she was shaping the future. This was the true meaning of her mornings. And as we follow the rest of her day, we will see how these early hours set the tone for everything that follows. The flow of work, the joy of community, the warmth of family, and the quiet reflections at dusk. As the morning hours unfold, the classroom begins to hum with a rhythm all its own. The first burst of energy from the children, their chatter, their restless shuffling, their eagerness to be anywhere but seated, slowly yields to the steady cadence of lessons. Miss Parker, chalk in hand, becomes the conductor of this orchestra. With each subject she introduces, she guides the tempo, sometimes brisk and sharp, sometimes slow and thoughtful. The sun climbs higher in the sky, and the light that streams through the tall windows shifts, casting longer shadows across the desks. The air fills with the familiar symphony of pencils scratching, papers rustling, and the occasional cough or sneeze breaking the silence. This is the heart of the day, when learning takes root, when children's minds are tested and stretched, and when the patience of a teacher is both challenged and rewarded. The first subject of the mid-morning might be arithmetic. In the 1950s, arithmetic was taught with rigor and precision. Multiplication tables were not suggested but memorized. Long division was a rite of passage. Word problems challenged students to think practically. If a farmer sells 3 dozen eggs at 15 cents a dozen, how much does he earn? Miss Parker writes problems neatly across the chalkboard, her script crisp and slanted, honed by years of practice. The chalk dust gathers faintly on her fingertips, a badge of her profession. Students copy problems into lined notebooks, brows furrowed, tongues poking from the corners of their mouths in concentration. "Remember," she says gently but firmly, "check your work twice." The answer matters, but the steps matter just as much. When a child struggles, she kneels beside their desk, pointing patiently to each line of numbers. Her encouragement is steady, never rushed. When a student succeeds, her smile carries quiet pride, not only for the answer, but for the effort. Mathematics in the 1950s was not flashy, but it was foundational. It built discipline, logic, and perseverance, qualities every teacher hoped to instill. After arithmetic comes language, a subject both beloved and dreaded. Handwriting drills fill the room with the steady scratch of pencils. Children practice looping their cursive letters, striving for smooth, elegant strokes. Each notebook page carries the weight of repetition. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, written line after line until the letters flow with natural grace. Spelling lessons follow. Words are recited aloud one by one as children try to spell them with confidence. A weekly spelling bee might be held, students standing proudly or nervously before the class, each hoping to make it through without faltering. Reading, too, is central. The classroom library is small, a shelf of well-worn books with covers frayed from countless hands, but each story carries magic. Miss Parker reads aloud with gentle drama, her voice carrying the room into distant lands or historical moments. Students take turns reading paragraphs, stumbling over difficult words, gaining courage with each attempt. Language lessons were not only about literacy, they were about communication, clarity, and imagination. Through words, children learn to express themselves, to think critically, and to dream beyond the classroom walls. Midday often brings the subjects that root children in their identity, history and geography. The pulled-down map of the United States creaks slightly as Miss Parker tugs it down, the paper curling at the edges from years of use. A globe rests on her desk, its oceans faded blue, its countries marked with borders that already, in the wake of war, are beginning to shift. history lessons focus on the founding fathers, the Revolutionary War and the Constitution. Stories of Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War remind students of sacrifice and unity. For older grades, recent history, the World Wars, is taught with solemn respect, though details may be softened for young minds. Geography lessons take students across mountains, rivers, and oceans. They trace their fingers over maps, learning capitals, states, and continents. Miss Parker points out faraway lands, sparking curiosity in children who may never travel beyond their county lines. These subjects are more than facts. They are the threads of identity and belonging. In the 1950s, history and geography instilled patriotism, pride, and an awareness of the wider world. Science, though modest in resources, ignites curiosity. A simple experiment, vinegar and baking soda fizzing in a jar, or seeds sprouting in a windowsill cup, feels wondrous. Miss Parker explains the parts of a plant, the phases of the moon, the basics of electricity. Sometimes she wheels in a film projector, threading reels carefully through its metal arms. The hum of the machine fills the room as black and white educational films flicker across a pull-down screen. Wide-eyed students watch animated diagrams of atoms or cheerful narrators explaining the solar system. Though limited, these moments carry weight. Science is not only knowledge, it is discovery. It teaches children to ask questions, to observe, to wonder. Of course, the day is not without challenges. A room full of children, no matter how well behaved, carries the energy of youth. Whispered conversations spark in the back row. Paper airplanes sometimes appear when a teacher's back is turned. Discipline in the 1950s is firm, sometimes stern. A sharp look, a raised eyebrow, or the authoritative tap of a ruler on a desk is often enough to restore order. More serious misbehavior might mean staying after school to write lines on the board. I will not talk in class. I will not talk in class. But discipline is balanced with fairness. Teachers like Miss Parker understood that respect had to be earned as well as enforced. Her firmness came with consistency, her authority with compassion. Students may have feared her disapproval, but they cherished her praise even more. Between subjects, moments of humanity shine through. A shy child hesitates to answer, and Miss Parker gently encourages them until their voice grows louder. A boy struggling with arithmetic receives extra patience. A girl with a talent for writing earns a quiet compliment that sparks her confidence. These small interactions are the soul of teaching. They are not recorded in textbooks or lesson plans, but they shape lives. Decades later, former students might not remember the details of every lesson, but they remember the kindness, the encouragement, the way their teacher made them feel seen. During a brief pause, perhaps as students copy problems from the board, Miss Parker allows herself a moment of thought. She wonders about the future of these children. Some will grow to become farmers, shopkeepers, or homemakers. Others may go further, to college, to cities, to professions their parents never dreamed of. She also thinks of her own life. Teaching is her world, but it is also demanding. The papers to grade, the endless patience required, the sacrifices of personal time. Yet she knows she would not trade it. Each face before her is a reason to continue, a reason to endure the long hours and modest pay. As the hours pass, the flow of the day becomes a rhythm. Subject after subject, exercise after exercise, the structure provides both children and teacher with order. The ringing of the bell marks transitions, breaking the day into manageable pieces. The classroom is both demanding and fulfilling. It is noisy, messy, challenging, but also alive with learning and growth. By midday, the students are restless, eager for recess or lunch, but they have absorbed lessons that will remain long after the day ends. The morning lessons draw to a close. The children's eyes wander toward the clock, their stomachs rumbling softly. Miss Parker wraps up the final exercise, collecting notebooks or assigning a brief reading to prepare for after lunch. The bell rings and the classroom empties into the hallway and out onto the playground. The noise rises again. Laughter, footsteps, the joyful chaos of freedom. For Miss Parker, the pause is welcome. She straightens the desks, takes a sip from her thermos, and breathes deeply. The day is only half finished, but the morning's flow has carried both challenges and triumphs. The afternoon will bring new lessons, new struggles, and new moments of joy. But for now, the classroom rests, and the teacher allows herself a moment of stillness. In the 1950s, a teacher was never just a professional hidden within classroom walls. They were a fixture of the community, woven into its very heartbeat. Miss Parker could not step into the corner store without hearing a cheerful, "Hello, Miss Parker," from parents or children. Teachers carried a reputation that extended far beyond grades and report cards. They were trusted voices, moral guides, and often mediators between parents and children. In small towns especially, where everyone knew everyone, the teacher's role was magnified. A good teacher became a symbol of hope and progress, a reminder to parents that their children had the chance to reach further than they had. This constant visibility was both rewarding and demanding. Every Sunday at church, Miss Parker would find herself surrounded by students sitting neatly in pews, their parents glancing proudly at her, as though her presence added weight to the service. At the local diner, children waved shyly from booths, reminding her that she was never entirely off duty. Parents in the 1950s held teachers in high regard. They trusted them, sometimes more than they trusted themselves, to shape their children's futures. When a teacher sent home a note about misbehavior, it carried weight. A parent's scolding at home was swift, for they believed a teacher's authority extended naturally into the household. Yet with this respect came responsibility. Miss Parker often felt the unspoken expectations pressing upon her. Parents wanted not only knowledge, but also discipline, manners, and moral grounding instilled in their children. A teacher was not simply an instructor of arithmetic and grammar, but a guardian of values, a role model for the community's ideals. At times, this could be a burden. After long days, Miss Parker carried home not only stacks of papers to grade, but also the quiet knowledge that she was shaping more than academics. She was shaping character. Church was the social and spiritual center of the 1950s community, and teachers were often closely tied to it. Miss Parker sang in the choir on Sundays, her voice blending with neighbors, her students looking up at her with admiration. Holiday pageants and Christmas plays were often organized with the teacher's help, bringing together children and parents in evenings of shared joy. Community fairs, 4-H club events, and school picnics gave her chances to see families outside the classroom. She walked among booths of homemade pies, admired quilts sewn by local mothers, and watched her students run potato sack races with laughter echoing across the fields. These moments reminded her that teaching was not an isolated profession. It was deeply tied to the spirit of the town. Every achievement of her students reflected upon her, and every milestone in the community found her participating in some way, as organizer, volunteer, or simply supporter. Though her profession demanded much, Miss Parker carved out small spaces for herself. Leisure in the 1950s was modest but meaningful. At home in her small rented house, she might spend evenings listening to the crackling radio. Programs ranged from dramas and comedies to music hours that filled her living room with big band sounds or the smooth voices of crooners. The soft glow of a lamp illuminated her as she read novels or leafed through magazines. Occasionally, she joined friends for a night at the cinema. A ticket cost little, and the theater provided escape into stories grander than the small town could offer. She watched westerns, romances, and comedies, losing herself in the glamour of Hollywood for a few hours. Sometimes, leisure was as simple as sitting on her porch in the evening, watching the quiet rhythm of her street. Children playing stickball, neighbors chatting, fireflies blinking against the dusk. These small moments grounded her, offering rest before another demanding day. The personal life of a teacher in the 1950s was often under quiet scrutiny. In small towns, everyone noticed who came to visit, who walked home with her after church, who lingered at her door too long. Some teachers were married, balancing family life with their classroom duties. Others, like Miss Parker, remained single, dedicating themselves fully to teaching. For her, social gatherings often revolved around other teachers or church groups. A monthly potluck supper, a bridge game with neighbors, or a Sunday picnic provided chances for laughter and companionship. Romantic possibilities were sometimes complicated. Suitors came and went, but the life of a teacher was demanding, and the expectations of the community could weigh heavily on such matters. Yet, whether married or not, most teachers found their identity tied less to romance and more to the steady devotion they gave to their students. Even in her leisure, Miss Parker sought to grow. Teaching in the 1950s often meant limited access to resources. So many teachers invested their own time in learning. She borrowed books from the town library, subscribed to educational magazines, and attended summer institutes when she could afford them. Her leisure, in many ways, blurred with her profession. An evening spent reading about new teaching methods was both personal enrichment and preparation for her students. She took quiet pride in staying ahead, knowing that her commitment extended beyond the school bell. Though deeply rewarding, the constant intertwining of school and community left little room for privacy. Every trip to the grocery store, every Sunday sermon, every stroll through town reminded Miss Parker that she lived under watchful eyes. Sometimes she longed for anonymity, a place where she could simply be herself, not the teacher. Yet she also cherished the respect and belonging her role provided. When a parent stopped her to say, "My son loves your class," or when a child rushed up with a smile outside school, the sacrifices felt lighter. Community life was also marked by seasons, and teachers were at the heart of each celebration. Autumn brought harvest festivals and school fairs. Miss Parker admired pumpkins lined along fences, graded essays by lamplight as the days grew shorter, and prepared for Thanksgiving plays where children donned paper pilgrim hats. Winter meant Christmas programs, carols singing, and the joy of giving small gifts to her students, perhaps a pencil, piece of candy, or a handwritten note. Spring bloomed with May Day dances, Easter services, and the thrill of students growing restless as the year neared its close. Summer offered respite, time for teachers to rest, study, or take temporary work, but also reunions with students seen at the county fair or church picnics. Each season bound the teacher more deeply to the rhythm of community life. For Miss Parker, leisure was not only recreation but reflection. On quiet evenings, she thought of her students' futures, of her own journey, of the changes in the world beyond her small town. The 1950s were an era of transition. Television was arriving, cities were expanding, and the Cold War was shaping global fears. She knew her students would grow into this changing world, and she wondered how best to prepare them. Her leisure, then, was often filled with both rest and responsibility. By the time night settled and lamps dimmed, Miss Parker understood that her life was not lived in isolation. Every lesson taught, every child encouraged, every handshake with a parent left a mark. Her leisure hours, her community engagements, her presence in church or fairgrounds all became part of her students' memory of what it meant to learn and to grow. Teachers of the 1950s left legacies not only through academics, but through their constant presence. They were remembered not just for arithmetic and grammar, but for kindness, fairness, and the example they set as steady figures in a shifting world. When the final bell rang in the 1950s, the sound was less a release for the teacher than it was for the children. Shoes squeaked against the polished floor as students gathered their books, lunch pails, and coats. Chatter filled the air. Plans for play, stories to tell parents, or hurried steps to get home before chores. Then almost suddenly the noise would fade. The room that had been alive with restless energy all day sank into silence. Dust motes drifted lazily through the golden light slanting in from the tall windows. Desks sat in tidy rows again, and only the faint chalk writing on the board hinted at the lessons that had filled the hours. For Miss Parker, these moments held a strange beauty. She walked between the desks, straightening a pile of books here, picking up a stray pencil there, her footsteps echoing softly. The school felt both vast and intimate, without the presence of children. In that hush, she often found herself reflecting, not just on what had been taught, but on what had been felt. Evenings for a teacher in the 1950s did not begin with rest. They began with paperwork. Miss Parker would sit at her sturdy oak desk, pulling out the stack of arithmetic worksheets or spelling quizzes collected that morning. A red pencil in hand, she methodically marked errors, circled corrections, and occasionally left encouraging notes in the margins. Each paper represented not just a task completed, but a small window into a child's mind. A mistake in long division revealed where patience was needed. A carefully written essay spoke of hidden talents. Sometimes she smiled at the doodles in margins, sketches of horses, stick figure families, or rockets blasting toward imagined futures. The hours slipped by unnoticed as she worked through the pile. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows across the desks. She might pause to stretch, listening to the faint hum of cicadas or the distant sound of a car engine fading down the road. For her, grading was not drudgery. It was a continuation of the day's mission, the unseen labor that shaped tomorrow's lessons. By late afternoon or early evening, she would finally gather her things. The chalkboard was cleaned, the erasers clapped outside to release their clouds of white dust, and the windows shut against the cool night air. The walk home was a ritual in itself. The town streets glowed softly in the waning light. Shopkeepers pulled down awnings, neon signs flickered on, and families gathered for supper. Passing neighbors offered friendly greetings. "Good evening, Miss Parker." She nodded back warmly, her school bag tucked under her arm. Children waved as they played stickball or hopscotch on the sidewalks. Even outside the classroom, her presence carried weight. She was more than a passerby. She was a figure children respected, even while at play. That simple acknowledgement often warmed her heart, a reminder that her influence stretched into every corner of their young lives. At home, evenings began simply. Miss Parker's small rented house carried the quiet comforts of modest living. A kettle whistled softly on the stove, filling the air with steam as she prepared her supper. Meals were uncomplicated, perhaps meatloaf left over from the night before, fresh bread from the bakery, or a simple stew simmering gently. She ate alone most nights. Though loneliness could sometimes creep in, solitude also carried its own peace. The radio played in the background, perhaps the soft crooning of Nat King Cole or the brisk rhythms of Perry Como. Between bites, she listened to the evening news, a reminder of a world both larger and more complicated than her small town. At times, she set her plate aside, opening a book while she ate. Historical novels, poetry, or professional texts on teaching filled her shelves. Reading was both relaxation and enrichment. Supper became not just nourishment for the body, but for the spirit. Not every evening was solitary. Once or twice a week, the rhythm of town life drew her outward. Church gatherings. Wednesday evenings often meant choir practice or prayer meetings. Voices rose in harmony beneath the high rafters, echoing through the sanctuary, binding the community together. Social suppers. The local ladies' circle, or teachers' association, hosted potluck dinners, where laughter mingled with the smell of casseroles and pies. Children darted between tables while adults shared stories. School events, plays, sports games, or PTA meetings filled evenings too. Teachers were expected to attend, and Miss Parker rarely missed them. She cheered as her students ran across the baseball diamond or proudly applauded their recitations on stage. These evenings reminded her that teaching was not an isolated calling. It was a thread woven tightly into the tapestry of community life. On quieter nights, she found small joys in simple things. She might set up her sewing kit, mending a hem while the radio hummed. Or she settled into her armchair, writing letters to family or distant friends. The scratch of her pen on paper carried a rhythm that felt almost meditative. Sometimes she treated herself to the cinema. Walking down Main Street to the marquee glowing with the latest film titles, she felt part of a larger story. Of an America captivated by Hollywood. She laughed at comedies, sighed at romances, and let westerns transport her to landscapes as wide and untamed as her imagination. These leisure moments, though modest, restored her spirit. They gave balance to a life of giving, of constant service to others. It was often in the stillness before bed that Miss Parker's reflections deepened. Sitting by her window with a cup of tea, she gazed out at the quiet street. The lamplight glowed softly, and shadows of elm trees stretched across the road. Her mind replayed moments from the day. The child who finally mastered multiplication, the one who struggled to sit still, the laughter that rang during recess. She thought of their futures, imagining who might become farmers, shopkeepers, nurses, or perhaps even teachers themselves. She also reflected on her own journey. Had she given enough today? Could she have been more patient with Johnny when he fumbled his spelling words? Did Mary see the encouragement in her smile, even though her essay was full of errors? These quiet self-examinations were not burdens, but part of her devotion. She wanted always to give her best. Reflection in the 1950s could not escape the shadow of the times. The Cold War simmered quietly, and nightly news carried stories of far-off places. Teachers like Miss Parker carried an awareness that the world her students would inherit was rapidly changing. Sputnik had not yet launched, but whispers of science and technology advancing faster than ever reached her ears. She wondered how her small-town lessons would prepare children for a world so vast and unpredictable. And yet she took comfort in knowing that character, kindness, and discipline, the values she instilled daily, would matter in any era. Education was not just preparation for careers, but for life. Before sleep, she laid out the next day's plans. Papers neatly stacked, textbooks marked with slips of paper, a fresh stick of chalk waiting on her desk for the morning. She found peace in this order. Preparation was a way of honoring her students. A silent promise that tomorrow would be worthy of their attention and effort. Sometimes she wrote small notes of encouragement to slip into a child's desk the next morning. A simple, "Well done," or "I'm proud of you," carried more weight than any grade. These acts of kindness, performed in the quiet of evening, often bloomed into confidence in the daylight hours. Finally, the day closed with the ritual of rest. She pulled quilts over herself, the faint scent of soap and laundry lingering in the fabric. Outside, crickets sang their nighttime chorus. Lying in bed, she let her mind wander to dreams of her childhood, to prayers for her students, to hopes for the future. Sleep came gradually, as if the weight of the day, heavy yet fulfilling, had to be set down piece by piece. By the time the town sank into slumber, Miss Parker's day had folded gently into memory, ready to begin anew with tomorrow's dawn. What remained most striking about evenings in the 1950s was not their excitement, but their constancy. Teachers like Miss Parker found meaning in the rhythm of quiet duties, in reflection, in service, and in the smallest joys. They lived lives that seemed ordinary yet carried extraordinary influence. Each evening, though private and modest, shaped the way they would step back into the classroom the next day. And decades later, when students remembered their teachers, it was not only the lessons of spelling or history they recalled, it was the sense of stability, the kindness, and the example set by a figure who gave her days and her evenings to their growth. There's a certain quiet that settles over memory, much like the hush that falls over a town at dusk. You can almost hear it, the softened footsteps on gravel roads, the low murmur of families gathering indoors, the distant laughter that floats through the air before night pulls its curtain shut. Time has a way of folding these sounds together so that when we close our eyes, yesterday feels close enough to touch. Looking back isn't about measuring what we lost, but about rediscovering the beauty that once filled the simplest of moments. A rocking chair on the porch, a song on the radio, the way sunlight cut through lace curtains in the morning. These fragments, small and delicate, hold the weight of entire lives. We've walked together through mornings, through the steady rhythm of work, through the laughter of community, and through the quiet reflections of evening. Now, as we stand at the edge of this journey, it feels right to let memory do what it does best. inspire us, guide us, remind us that what we carry forward isn't just the past, but the love, wisdom, and courage planted in it. When people think of legacy, they often picture something grand, buildings that outlast their builders, names engraved in marble, achievements that echo across time. But in truth, the most enduring legacies are rarely loud. They live in the quiet rituals of daily life, in the values whispered from one generation to the next. It is in the smell of bread baking on a Sunday morning. It is in the calloused hand that still reached for yours when you crossed the street. It is in the stories told at the dinner table, again and again, until they became part of you. These were not extraordinary events. They were not history-making moments. Yet for those who lived them, they became the very fabric of existence. And when we look back with nostalgia, it is never the trophies or medals we long for. It is the way the floor creaked under our childhood steps, the way the world felt safe when a loved one's voice called our name. What once seemed ordinary reveals itself as sacred when remembered. Time doesn't move quickly. It moves steadily, patiently, waiting for us to notice what truly matters. It teaches through both presence and absence. We may forget the days of hard work, the exact wages earned, or the endless chores that filled a season. But we rarely forget how someone made us feel. We remember kindness. We remember laughter. We remember the warmth of belonging. That is time's greatest lesson. What lasts is not the material, but the emotional threads binding us to others. The sound of your grandmother humming while knitting, the way your father paused to wave goodbye every single morning, the shared glances at a family table when words weren't necessary. Each memory is like a lantern, glowing softly in the night of forgetfulness. And when the present feels uncertain, these lanterns remind us that we have always been held by something larger: love, resilience, and the endless cycle of human connection. Nostalgia has a curious habit. It softens the edges of memory. We remember the cracked paint on the walls as charming. We think fondly of the squeaky door that once annoyed us. Even the hardships, the long winters, the shortages, the endless waiting for better days, become threads in a greater tapestry of gratitude. Perfection was never part of the story. Life was messy. It was sometimes unfair. But when we look back, we realize those imperfections gave the story its humanity. The chipped teacup, used every morning without fail, is remembered not for its flaw, but for its familiarity. The patched-up coat wasn't a symbol of lack, but of care. Someone took the time to mend it because you mattered. Even the nights when there wasn't quite enough food to go around are recalled not with bitterness, but with tenderness, because someone somewhere made sure you had the bigger share. In the end, nostalgia teaches us that love was always greater than circumstance. If memory were only for ourselves, it would be precious enough. But its real beauty lies in its ability to connect generations. Stories passed down like heirlooms, sometimes in words, sometimes in gestures, sometimes in silence. A grandchild may never know the hardships a grandparent endured, yet somehow they inherit the strength born from them. A lullaby sung to a baby in 1925 finds its way, unchanged, into the voice of a parent in 2025. The thread is unbroken. We carry those before us, often without realizing it. The way we season food, the way we celebrate holidays, even the way we laugh, all are echoes. And when we pause long enough to notice, it fills us with a profound sense of belonging. We are not alone. We are part of something enduring. It's not just memory, it's continuity. There is courage in remembering, not because memory is always gentle, but because it asks us to face what is gone, to admit that time has moved on. Nostalgia is not denial, it is acknowledgement, wrapped in tenderness. To remember is to say, this mattered. This street mattered. This voice mattered. This love mattered. And by remembering, we refuse to let it slip into silence. Sometimes the act of telling a story about the way your grandparents danced in the kitchen or the way the town gathered after church isn't just for the listener. It's for you, too. It's a way of keeping yourself tethered to the truths that shaped you. A way of saying, I was here, we were here, and it meant something. The inspiration of yesterday for today, nostalgia, doesn't trap us in the past. It guides us into the future. The values we admired then are the values we still need now. Kindness, patience, community, gratitude. When we remember neighbors helping each other through storms, we are reminded that solidarity is still possible today. When we recall the joy of shared meals, we recognize that wealth lies not in possessions, but in fellowship. When we think of how little people had, yet how much they gave, we are reminded that generosity has no measure. The past is not a cage, it is a compass. And when life feels overwhelming, remembering where we came from often shows us where we need to go. As this journey through memory draws to a close, imagine again that small town at dusk, lights glowing in windows, the faint smell of dinner carried on the wind, a child running barefoot before being called inside. Now imagine yourself years later standing at that same corner. The houses have changed, the people are gone. But if you stand quietly enough, you can almost hear them. The echoes of yesterday, still alive, still vibrant, still yours. Life will always move forward. Seasons will shift, generations will rise. Technology will transform how we live. Yet no invention, no progress, no future will ever erase the simple, profound truth that love in all its humble forms is timeless. And so we carry these memories not as burdens, but as blessings. They are reminders that the ordinary was extraordinary all along, that every handshake, every smile, every quiet evening mattered. That life, no matter how fleeting, leaves behind something eternal when it is lived with care. As you step away from these words, perhaps you'll feel it too, that gentle pull of nostalgia, urging you to treasure today a little more. To notice the light falling across your own window, to linger at the table with loved ones, to write down the stories before they fade. Because someday someone will look back on this very moment with the same tenderness. They will remember your laughter, your patience, your love. You will be the echo in their evening reflections. And isn't that, after all, the most beautiful conclusion